The doomsday clock is ticking relentlessly towards midnight. It is becoming increasingly obvious by the day that humankind is on a high-tech, high-consumption joyride into an abyss and taking a great deal of the natural world with it. And sadly, beloveds, no amount of well-meaning reductions in our carbon emissions or our use of plastic bags or whatever is going to do anything more than slow the vehicle down. If we are to change our trajectory and rescue ourselves from the brink of extinction, we have to change the consciousness of the driver. The current driver of evolution on planet Earth is now not Darwinian selection. Human consciousness is now the driving force of evolution on planet Earth. There isn't a single atom on the planet that is not now impacted upon by human consciousness, by human behavior. It has been aptly said that at this time in our history, consciousness finds itself in a race against catastrophe. Our current driver is our ego, the human ego, the illusory sense of being a separate self. And our ego is deeply embedded in a story of separation. It tells us that we are separate from each other, separate from the natural world, and perhaps most tragically of all, separate from our own inner depths. The story of separation and the gross materialism and ego consciousness it has spawned is simply not worthy of us. We are capable in our humanity of a much deeper, broader consciousness than the fear-driven, skin-encapsulated ego. And indeed, across cultures and across history, we have worshipped, revered, honored individuals who manifest a very different level of consciousness from ego. Individuals who've experienced a connection with our divine source, a connection that has inspired in them a compassion for all sentient beings, an honoring of the sacredness of life, and a dedication to service for the greater good. That consciousness is no longer the prerogative of the saint or the sage or the mystic or the guru. It is the birthright of each and every one of us. And the time to bring it forth, to embody it, is now, when consciousness finds itself in a race against catastrophe. And that's not such a big ask, because all of us have mystical moments. We have moments where we feel that interconnectedness, be it when we're immersed in the beauty of nature, perhaps, or when or as mothers, loving our children, parents, loving our children, feeling that unconditional love for our children, or just simply being in love. The Sufi mystic poet Rumi, whom I adore, said, "Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, be in love." Isn't that gorgeous? Be in love with life, with your pet, with your lover, but just rest in the consciousness of being in love. So our challenges at this time demand nothing less, actually, than a whole revolution in consciousness. If we are to bring ourselves back from the brink of extinction, we need a revolution in consciousness, no small matter. And it has to be helped by a change in our story, a new story that transcends the wounds and the separateness of our separation story. And for thousands of years, the human psyche has been enriched, uplifted by creation stories that give meaning and purpose to life, that feed the yearning of the soul for wholeness and holiness. The very absence of such a story at this time in our history goes a long way to explain our addiction to materialism and consumerism. Materialism and consumerism become like a a facade that masks the pointlessness of life. No wonder we have an epidemic of teenage suicide, of depression, of drug addiction, of obesity, and so forth. To address these problems, we need to address the spiritual roots of them. And to do that, we need to offer a new story around what it means to be human. A story that will bring wholeness and holiness and purpose and meaning back into our lives. And the good news is, and we don't hear much good news, but the good news is that taking wings across the planet is indeed a whole new story around what it means to be human. It is known as evolutionary spirituality, or as I like to call it, evolutionary mysticism. It tells us that the universe is not a random, purposeless conglomeration of inert matter that has somehow birthed consciousness. No, it is a living, evolving, endlessly creative, purposeful, divine mystery. And every atom, every cell, every living being is a unique, sacred manifestation of a sublime, transcendent intelligence. And interestingly enough, it's a story that actually aligns very beautifully with the cosmic drama of evolution that's been revealed to us by modern science. All our story is doing is breathing sentience and purpose into that story. And indeed, the Dalai Lama has often said that the wondrous future for humanity is possible if we begin to integrate the findings of modern science, of quantum physics, etc., with the time-honored mystical insights into the nature of reality. And that's pretty well what our new story is doing. Now, evolution has been described as the greatest discovery in the whole scientific enterprise. And I'd like you to just get a handle on the huge mystery that is evolution. And we'll do that with an example or something that the cosmologist and mathematician Brian Swimme uses. And Brian Swimme was one of the voices that converted me to evolutionary spirituality back in the 90s, when he talked about the beauty, the sacredness of the cosmic drama. And he says, look at evolution this way, cosmic evolution. Take some hydrogen gas, a colorless, odorless gas, and one of the first elements to appear in the flaring forth of energy that we call the Big Bang. Swimme says that's an erroneous name for it. Big Bang, and you think shrapnel. It's not that. It's a flaring forth of sacred energy. He calls it the primordial fireball. Much nicer. Take hydrogen gas, which emerged very soon after that flaring forth. Colorless, odorless gas. Leave it alone for 13.7 billion years, and it becomes giraffes, rose bushes, human beings, the music of Bach and Beethoven, and so on. Getting a handle on that is like a mystical experience. What is going on? That is so sublime. And here's the thing. Evolutionary spirituality believes that this transcendent intelligence that has orchestrated the whole story is now, for the first time in history, beginning to experience itself through human consciousness. I repeat that, the transcendent intelligence, it's the driving force of this amazing cosmic drama, is now poised to experience itself through the consciousness of the human, and allow the human consciousness to guide and direct the future of humanity, or the future of evolution on planet Earth. In other words, we become co-creators with God, conscious evolution. This is the gem of our new story. What we begin to feel when we transcend the ego and begin to embrace this new story is that our will, our little will, our ego, is transcended by surrendering to the divine will, the will of the greater intelligence. And the Taoists understood this when they said that liberation comes through flowing in the current of the eternal Tao. I love that. flow in the current of the eternal Tao. That's exactly what our new story is inviting us to do. And spiritual evolutionaries believe and speak of this transcend, this sublime intelligence that is orchestrating the cosmic drama, is the force of love, divine love. We call it Eros, the evolutionary Eros. And when we surrender to the will of this divine Eros, we are bringing more goodness, truth, and beauty into creation, and more joy into our personal lives. What more can we possibly ask? So our consciousness revolution is awakening the mystic in us. I think each one of us at heart is a mystic. Some of you may have heard of Jean Houston, a very brilliant, ebullient teacher, philosopher, psychologist. She's been around since the 1960s and 70s when she pioneered the human potential movement. And she remains a very powerful voice on the planet at the moment, particularly when empowering Indigenous women, and of course embraces our new story. She said recently, the greatest accelerator of consciousness, of evolution on planet Earth at the moment is mystical experience. Not quantum computers or artificial intelligence, mystical experience. That's very profound. And the mystic, the Christian mystic Wayne Teasdale, in his wonderful book, The Mystic Heart, put it this way. He said, mysticism is the most precious gift entrusted to the human family, and the most effective means of transforming our attitudes, our actions, our lives. Mysticism is the most precious resource, the most effective way of transforming our attitudes, our actions, and our lives. Western psychotherapy really needs to take that insight, that wisdom on board. We are entering, beloveds, the age of mysticism, universal mysticism. Because for the first time in history, we're able to harvest the riches, the spiritual, mystical riches and techniques and wisdom of all the ancient wisdom traditions. And also, of course, the wisdom of the shamanic indigenous cultures. We can choose what works for us, what lights us up. It's magical. Well, I shouldn't use the word magical, it gives a wrong connotation, but it's a new time in history, and an exciting time. We're witnessing in the 21st century nothing less than a mystical renaissance, which is going to transform what it means to be human, if we embrace it. A word of warning, however. Because we live in such a narcissistic culture through our separation story, our mystical experiences and our spiritual paths, well-meaning though they can be, often get hijacked by the ego. It is still so pervasive. And then our spiritual path becomes one of being all about my enlightenment, my well-being, my awakening, and so on and so forth. Or it can also seduce us into wanting to remain in states of bliss, not engage with the world at all, and see the world and rationalize that, and seeing the world as a dream or unreal or unimportant or whatever. That's where our new story is so important, because it anchors that mystical experience in the understanding that it's all about bringing forth the divine will into the marketplace, into the world at this critical time in evolution on planet Earth, and serving the greater good. That grounds our spiritual practice and brings richer meaning to our spiritual practices than anything just surrounding our own egoic needs. Because, it's all about interconnectedness. What we do affects everybody. And of course, our mystical renaissance is very much a consequence of the rise of the feminine in our time. Our very pathologically, really, masculine-dominated Western culture has indeed given us all our wondrous technology with its, exteriority, with its exterior focus and its focus on doing rather than being. It's given us the most amazing technology, and we can bow to that. However, sadly, it has left us pretty well in the Stone Age when it comes to inner wisdom and spiritual technologies. So our consciousness revolution and our mystical renaissance are very much about redressing that imbalance, and that imbalance has to be redressed to heal the wounds inflicted upon us by the story of separation. We must balance the masculine and the feminine energies within each of us, the doing and the being, the yang and the yin, the inner and the outer. In the language of sacred psychology, we say that our mystical renaissance is about the return of the goddess, or the rise of the goddess in our time. She's called the guardian of interiority. She guides us on our inner journey. She says, not the do's and the don'ts of the patriarchy, but consult your inner heart, your inner wisdom on your actions. No priests needed, no dogmas, no theology. I love a quote from the naturalist David Abraham on this. He certainly embraced our new story when he writes, carnally immersed as we are in a breathing planet, we each have our own access to the great mystery. Capital G, capital M. Carnally immersed as we are in a breathing planet, we all have our own intimate, unique access to the great mystery. Isn't that beautiful? So how do we find that access, that unique, intimate access to the mystery? One of the most powerful tools is mystic meditation. I call it mystic meditation to distinguish it from secular mindfulness meditation, which of course is becoming immensely popular across the planet, and that is wonderful. That is part of our consciousness revolution. Of course, I'm not criticizing that at all, but mystic meditation is different. Mystic meditation is devotional, and in the inner stillness of your meditation practice, you become receptive to, you awaken yourself to a connection with what the Sufis so delightfully call the beloved of the soul, capital B, the beloved of the soul, which is very often experienced as an inner light, divine light. And there's a beautiful poem from the Sufi mystic Hafiz. It's interesting how Hafiz and Rumi are becoming so popular now, and again, symptomatic of our revolution in consciousness. The Sufi mystic poet Hafiz wrote a beautiful poem using the metaphor of the rose to convey the power of that inner light. He writes, how did the rose ever open its heart and give to the world all of its beauty? It felt the encouragement of light upon its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. So the inner light of the divine, when we experience it within ourselves, transforms our perception of the world. The inner enriches the outer. The outer becomes rejuiced, re-enchanted with a sense of the sacred. We begin to perceive the world as a thou rather than an it. That's beautiful. With mystic meditation and the connection to the inner beloved, and with all mystically based body practices like yoga, martial arts, and so forth, we're beginning to awaken what I call our mystical anatomy, our subtle anatomy. We begin to feel flows of subtle energy through your body. And we are so much more than the flesh and bone and blood, marvelous though that is, that we understand ourselves to be in the story of separation. We are an energy field. We are in this fields, energy fields within energy fields, whatever. So with these practices, we begin to actually experience ourselves as flows of energy. And in particular, we awaken the energy centers on the spine, known in the East as the chakras, including, very especially, the heart chakra in the center of the chest. And very importantly, the third eye here, the tunnel through the center of the head here, because that's the entry into our subtle anatomy, into our mystical anatomy. And the connection between the awakening of the heart chakra and the third eye and the heart chakra is very powerful, very transforming. So we could say that our consciousness revolution is all about awakening our heart intelligence. Ramana Maharshi said that enlightenment is all about learning to rest your consciousness at all times in your heart. Sounds very simple. Not so easy in practice, but so beautiful. Because it changes your perception, changes the way you relate to people in the world. Resting in the heart consciousness, awakening the heart consciousness. And it can be experienced very tangibly when you begin to connect with your subtle energy, your mystical anatomy, as a softening and an expansion, and a feeling of expansion in the heart center, in the center of the chest. Consciousness of all the chakras, the energy centers, begin to be experienced. And you realize that, you don't have to live in the head. There's so much richness elsewhere in your body once you connect with the beloved. And this is all very exciting. And we're just at the kindergarten stage in all of this, of course, in our mystical renaissance. Just in the kindergarten stage. And this is, where we may go with all of this is just mind-boggling. And I came across a quote from Ram Dass recently, a popular guru at the time, a Western guru. He was a psychologist once, and of course had found a guru and converted to the Eastern way of thinking. And he's now very frail and in his 90s, but still a very, very strong voice for our consciousness revolution. He said recently, the intellect is the power tool of separation. The intuitive, compassionate heart is our doorway to unity. Isn't that gorgeous? The intellect is the power tool of separation. You might say the patriarchy too. The intuitive, compassionate heart is our doorway to unity. And when we awaken our heart intelligence and begin to feel our mystical anatomy, we are beginning to embody a whole new sense of self. I like to call this emerging self beyond ego as the snowflake self. But that has negative connotations for quite a few people, but I stay with it because just as each snowflake is a gorgeous, unique condensation of water, so too are we a gorgeous, unique condensation of the infinite when we begin to connect with the inner beloved, with our divine inner self. I also like Snowflake Self because it conveys a sense of lightness of being which comes on board when we begin to embody that consciousness. But at the same time, it is fragile. We so easily react back or freeze back into our ego. The Snowflake Self is just the next stage in the evolution of consciousness beyond ego. It may be fragile, but once you begin to experience it, it has such a different flavor from your ego consciousness. You will recognize it. The differences between them are very, very tangible. For example, the ego reacts emotionally. The snowflake self responds. It doesn't contract. It expands and listens to the other point of view or whatever. The ego self can be beset with jealousy and pettiness in that way. Jealousy is completely not on the palette of experience of the snowflake self. It delights and encourages the success of others, recognizing that we all have our unique gifts to bring to the world. Above all, the snowflake self loves to serve the greater good, and does so with humility and joy. Joy is a wonderful word. All the great mystical traditions tell us that the essence of the divine is joy. And when you begin to bring online through the Snowflake Self, you begin to tap into a well of causeless joy, of joy that is not dependent on anything that's going on around you in the world. You're able to understand what the wonderful mythologist, storyteller Joseph Campbell, who was very much a pioneer of our new story, said when he spoke of participating joyfully in the sorrows of the world. It's possible to participate joyfully in the sorrows of the world. That's a lovely message for us when we're beset with so much suffering and so many challenges in our current time. And we see that joy manifesting, of course, in His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in short, what our Snowflake Self is doing is realizing what the Dalai Lama has said when he speaks of the aim of life as being to embody the transcendent. It's exactly what we're beginning to do in our Snowflake Self. We're beginning to embody the transcendent, which is, in the Dalai Lama's words, the aim of life. However, we must understand that the Snowflake Self is just this fragile next stage in the evolution of consciousness. It's impossible for us, or most of us anyway, to have any inkling of what it might yet mean to embody the transcendent when we move beyond our kindergarten stage, if we succeed in doing that. So in bringing on our Snowflake Self, we are really changing our physiology. In computer parlance, it's like changing to a new operating system. We begin to light up new parts of the brain to make new neuronal pathways, to replace the ego ones with these new, more altruistic, whatever, pathways in the body. This is amazing. This is very exciting. It's a transformation of the human without any change to our DNA, simply by connecting with the divine light, connecting with our mystical potential. I have had the most delightful experiences with a group of teenage boys, disadvantaged boys who've suffered extreme abuse in their life and have been taken in by a school quite close to me, a school where the principal honours the new story of evolutionary spirituality and completely changes the approach to the education of these children, these boys. They have rituals in their daily life, they have meditation in their daily life. They are given the message that they are each unique and beautiful and have a gift to give to the world. And the transformation in these boys and the gratitude they express is really, really heartwarming. It's a delight to see. One of them confessed to me recently that were it not for the school, he would have taken his own life. So this is just how dramatic this new story can be in the lives of teenagers. Because one of the great messages of our new story is that indeed each one of us has a special gift to bring to the world. It immediately lights us up and brings purpose and meaning into our lives. I like to use the analogy of the rose window of Chartres Cathedral. We are each like a shard of glass in that window. We may not have even seen the window or understand or seen it, but at least we understand that we are contributing essentially to the macro beauty, to the whole, the beauty of the whole. Or you might use the analogy that we are each a note in the cosmic symphony. We come into the world with a particularly unique note or musical phrase to give to that cosmic music. And the world is waiting for it. Only each one of us, only you can bring that note, that phrase into the music of cosmic, of the drama of love that is cosmic evolution. That's very awakening, very uplifting. How can you be depressed when you realize that and you appreciate what's going on in this drama of love? And this brings me to one of the core principles or elements or understanding of our new story, and that is sacred activism. It's a word used by mystic and scholar Andrew Harvey, who is doing so much for our new story of evolutionary mysticism at this time. Sacred activism. when the well-meaning social activism is inspired, motivated, fired by a connection with our divinity, inspired by our connection with the Tao. A whole new energy, creative energy arises. We know what we're meant to be doing. We bring a whole new energy to our social action, or our passion for justice. It's like a quantum leap in empowerment in terms of what we're capable of bringing to the world. And when sacred activists, or you might say snowflake selves, come together, the power of that emerging energy of transformation is amplified 1,000-fold. Andrew speaks of networks of grace. Isn't that beautiful? When sacred activists come together and share their ambition to change the world. When sacred activists come together in networks of grace, they're beginning to embody what Christ meant when he said that when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be in your midst. When 2 or 3 sacred activists, or we might say snowflake selves, are gathered, there is this input of divine energy and creativity. Egos gathering together just don't inspire that. It's not there for egos, but it's there for snowflake selves. And if we look at the whole drama of evolution, the whole story of evolution, we see that, atoms danced together to form molecules, and molecules came together to form cells, and cells came together to form organisms. Is it not possible that in our self beyond ego, humankind may indeed become a planetary network of grace, where we're interconnected enough to become the mind of the planet, the mind of Gaia? Just as each cell in the organism retains its unique, gorgeous individualism, so each one of us in that collective will continue to manifest our own unique, gorgeous individuality. It's a lovely vision. Our consciousness revolution and our mystical renaissance is inviting us into the reign of love. Human consciousness is a flowering, a blossoming of a living universe. And scientists tell us now that from the beginning of that emerging forth, that flaring forth of sacred energy, conditions, or the natural laws as scientists call them, were just right for the emergence of that exotic bloom. However, at this time in history, unprecedentedly, we are like a bud. That human consciousness is like a bud, poised to either burst into flower or wither on the vine. We are living between stories, poised on an evolutionary knife edge. In this situation, everything we do as individuals matters. We are in what scientists call a transition phase. When a system is at a transition phase, the slightest input of energy is amplified and can contribute towards the outcome of the system, whether it moves into a high level of complexity or collapses. We are currently, human consciousness in a phase transition. What chaos theory calls the butterfly effect comes into being, where the fluttering of a butterfly's wing in South America can affect the weather in China. So what we do as individuals matters, really matters. To choose an act of kindness over selfishness has repercussions at this time well beyond our capacity to envisage. However, the challenges in our time are such that we are called to do more than simply smile kindly in the street. We're being called to passionately devote our energies to our own awakening and to the well-being of the planet, to become, in other words, sacred activists, to do everything we possibly can to raise the power of love upwards to the next stage of human consciousness. Now, all that I've been saying has been, to my mind, beautifully summarized in a verse from British playwright Christopher Fry, writing in the mid-20th century, but his words are still so poignant for us now. I would like to share them with you and unpack them as I go. You might like to close your eyes just to listen, take it in. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries thaws, breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. What wonderful imagery for the meltdown of the patriarchy and the birth of our new consciousness, the upstart spring. He goes on, thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to meet us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the largest stride of soul folk ever took. The largest stride of soul folk ever took. What a wonderful description for our transition from ego to snowflake self, or to essence. He goes on, affairs are now soul-sized. The enterprise is exploration into God. Exploration into God, what a wonderful description for our inner journey, for our mystical renaissance. He goes on, where are you making for? It takes so many thousand years to wake. In other words, it's taken thousands of years for consciousness, human consciousness, to reach a time when it is ripe to embody the transcendent, and that time is now. It's taken so many thousand years to wake, but will you wake? For pity's sake. For pity's sake. Thank you, and may the goddess be with you, and help us all to find better ways of being human. And I hope you enjoyed the bird song while I've been talking to you.